Vaush, why can't people change their sex? I don't think when we talk about sex, we're talking about like dozens of physiological characteristics that exist on a spectrum, you know? Like skeletal shape is a sex-based characteristic, but it's not like there are just two skeletons that you're just born into. There's obviously tons of variance in height, hip width, and there are cis women with narrow hips and cis men with wide hips, like me. Again, I don't know. I don't think it shows because I'm wearing clothing, but like I have like, and I like it's like I like my hips are here and my waist is here. I I naturally have uh you need to pull it up higher. I tried. Look. Um but like I'm a male, you know. I'm an XY male. So anyway, there are characteristics that exist on a spectrum, and while doing stuff like sex reassignment surgery or feminization stuff or whatever alter some of those characteristics, I think it's really simplistic to refer to it as a sex change. That's the reason why most people talk about it like a gender confirmation. It's gender confirmation surgery now, you know? And that's better because the point of the surgery isn't to change your sex. The point of the surgery is to change physical characteristics so it's more in line with the common understanding of this gender, you know? Yeah, gender affirmation as well. Yeah, gender, yeah, that kind of stuff, you know? So it's not so much about like changing sex as it is, you know, the incongruity of expectation and so on. Transsexual is also inaccurate. Well, I get canceled for this, but I do think that the term transsexual is valid and useful. Transgender and transsexual. That a transgender person is anybody who identifies as anything other than that which they were assigned at birth. So non binary people who don't feel gender dysphoria, stuff like that. Whereas transsexual would refer to people who have gender dysphoria, which I also don't like the name for. I think it should be sexual dysphoria because people with gender dysphoria aren't dysphoric about their gender identity. They're dysphoric about their physical characteristics. It's sexual dysphoria. I don't know why when we conflate gender and sex like this, we make it even more difficult to explain these concepts. Like, oh yeah, gender dysphoria is when there are sexual characteristics. It's like, oh, gender and sex are the same thing, and you're like, no, it's just that the term is dumb. I know a lot of people don't like the term novash, but they're dysphoric about their assigned gender at birth. Yeah, but we all believe in identity, right? They're dysphoric not about their identity, because you can change your identity. They're dysphoric about having a penis or about having stubble or whatever. Um, to me, it just feels like it's more accurate. And nobody likes the term transsexual anymore. Yeah, no, I know. The term transsexual has bad vibes, which sucks because I feel like there's validity there. And also, it would mean that you get to shut down people like Blair White so easily, who are like, when she's like, well, I'm a real transgender and non binary people are just whatever. They're their own thing, but I'm not the same as them. I experience medical dysphoria, gender dysphoria, which is a medical condition that so on and so forth, you know, and you could just be like, okay, you're both transgender and only you're transsexual. And then that solves the whole thing, and there's literally nothing she can say. But people just don't necessarily. But gender dysphoria can be hella social. Like in theory, I don't mind my vagina. I'm bothered my vagina has more of a social identity before I even get to introduce it to a person. Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's going to be complicated, and there's always going to be like degrees of variability. For example, like of all the people who have gender dysphoria, how many of them would still have gender dysphoria in a genderless society? It's a tough question, right? Because for some people with gender dysphoria, the incongruity between their brain and their body, so to speak, is an inset biological thing that they would feel even if they were like trapped on a desert island, you know? Even if it were like a fucking feral wolf person somewhere out into the Arctic wastes, they would still feel that, you know? Um, but, and again, I'm cis, so I recognize that I'm kind of inferring this from what I've seen in other people. It seems like um, there are many people, maybe not a majority, but many people who have gender dysphoria. It's not so much caused by their body as it is the incongruity between their body and the identity and role they want to have, you know? So, say they're a trans woman it's not that they necessarily have an issue with having a penis or with being tall or strong or anything like that. They don't necessarily have an issue with those things. But there's a dissonance between that feeling, the desire to be a woman, to being a woman, and that body. So in that case, the dysphoria is a product of the inability to slot comfortably into that role. And in those cases, if you were on like a desert island, maybe you would never have that feeling. You know, maybe it would never even occur to you because you never interact with another human. So there's never a social role that you feel like you're not capable of easily fitting into. I get your bug. I'm sure there will always be some ways of categorizing humans, but you know, I do think a genderless society is possible. Gaming moment, I think it's largely semantic. The point is that the point of like turning a dick into a vagina isn't sex change. You're just turning a dick into a vagina. The logistics of whether this does a sex change are, I think, arbitrary and maybe unanswerable, you know? Yeah, sir, political banana. And again, I feel like in this case, I really appreciate Contra's videos because she's like an umbrella. And every time she says something, I get to say it, even if it's controversial, because I have a trans person who I can point to. But Contra has pointed out, not Natalie has pointed out in the past that there, in some cases, are many similarities between people who feel gender dysphoria and people who are extremely agitated by other things about their body that they don't like. Not that they're necessarily the same thing, but in terms of behaviors, effect on your person and mental health, and treatment, there are some similarities. For example, it's not just people, for example, with like eating disorders or whatever. There are some people, like let's just say some skinny guys, who are really, really, really not happy about the fact that they don't look like a beefy muscle cake, you know? And whether or not they're working on that, the dissonance they feel, yeah, it's like a beauty standard thing, but sometimes beauty standards, when unmet, like ache at people. Like with, I've said this before, but with my weight loss, I was confident at 280 pounds. I'm going to be confident at 200 pounds. I'm always going to be confident. I don't care. Now I'm just confident and I'm lighter. Uh, and that's good for me. But there are people who, I mean, there's just this agonizing uh, self-loathing that goes along with their body not looking the way that it does. Sometimes it can be weight, sometimes it can be height. Height is a big one, by the way. Height is a big one. I'm going to be bold here and say that there are some short guys out there whose feelings about not being tall are definitely, at least in some ways, comparable to gender dysphoria because they're, in the case of wanting to be taller, it's sort of a desire for enhanced masculinization, and it can just eat at them, you know? Dude, I'm 5'11" and it's infuriating. You're literally taller than the average male. Shut the fuck up. You understand what I mean, right? So in a genderless society, it wouldn't be gender dysphoria, it'd just be body dysphoria. Yeah, or like sex dysphoria, because sex will always be a thing. Biological sex will always, until humans do some weird transhumanist shit, uh, we'll always have sexual differences. But the goal for me would be that in a future society, nothing about your life would be determined by the sex that you're born. That for me would be the goal, right? You know? Because right now, when the doctor says it's a boy, it's a girl, and immediately the socialization begins. Not neutral socialization, but a sort of biased, gender informed socialization where, I mean, once they're 3 or 4 or 5, and it goes on and on. And by the time, you know, they're like 9, and these are prepubescent children, a boy and a girl have very different avenues for socialization. Now, the funny thing is, it didn't used to be like this. You can see photos of Roosevelt in a dress when he was a little boy. Girl used to be a gender neutral term for young person. It was. And then when they got older and physiologically, you know, biologically, the boys and the girls were more distinguished, it became a lady and a boy. And girl was just a young person. Because what is the difference between a 2-year-old boy or girl? Nothing. There's no fucking difference between them. They're both stupid idiot. Fucking they're completely the same. Whatever, So, anyway, yeah, they used to put. Hold on, let me see. If I could find this because I think it sells the point rather well. Roosevelt boy dress. There we go. Now, of course, we'd say boy, but yeah, here we go. Here's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I mean, look, really. That was a little girl, and then he grew up into a boy, as opposed to a lady. But anyway, the thing is, it seems that with time, in some ways, we've actually heightened the gendered socialization. Now, ideally, in a genderless world, I think that you would be born, and regardless of whatever your biological makeup is, there would be essentially no difference in how you're treated, apart from obviously anything that is strictly a product of biology. I mean, you wouldn't be having like little teach female-bodied girls to use urinals or whatever. I mean, nothing stupid like that. But apart from that, it would have nothing to do with like social expectation, and and they would be free to live their lives however they liked. There would still probably be some social biases for people of different sexes. Like, for example, I'm willing to bet, for the most part, even in a genderless society, it's mostly going to be males in the construction industry. Maybe not like 90-10, or maybe not 60-40. I don't know exactly. It's probably mostly going to be. And maybe it would mostly be females in caregiver roles. I really don't know. So there are always going to be some biases as a product of sex, but way, way, way less than what we have right now. Way less. It's pretty extraordinary how much of an impact some of this stuff can have. Like, for example, back when they were just a kind of esoteric technological fascination, computers and computer science was uh, dominated by men and women. They worked together on the production of so much of the early computing and video game stuff that we knew and loved back then. But as time went on and computers and games became consumer products, they were marketed to boys primarily. And after that, not only did the ratio of men to women participating in the industry shift sharply, it then continued to shift in favor of boys, because this is the self-perpetuating cycle. If you're giving boys little video games and computer stuffs, then they're the ones who get interested in that, and then they grow up to get a computer science degree, and then they go and work in the industry. It's the same reason they called this the Scully effect. The X-Files, which is about a male and female FBI detective, Scully being the female. After the X-Files came out on TV, there was a very noticeable uptick in the number of female police investigators, because women were inspired by Scully, and they went out there and they actually went and fucking went through the academy and became police detectives. Which is interesting, right? I mean, that's representation matters. You just show a little bit, and then all of a sudden you get a shift in the demographics of people in a particular industry. And this happens all the time and time and time again. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me that much if Hamilton ended up significantly changing the demographics of theater participation in the coming decades. I would not be at all surprised by that, because theater is something which has historically been regarded as overwhelmingly white, and for good reason, because it's fucking theater. And Hamilton, which, for all of its problems and for being lib shit and for being blah blah blah, is a lot of black guys in Hamilton. So maybe that's going to lead to some kind of demographic shift afterwards. That would be interesting. People in those groups, minority groups, they are often. Sorry, my lip balm right now. They're often pulled away or towards certain industries over others, because they get the feeling that some of these things aren't for them. Oh, thank you, Hima. This is one of the reasons why trans representation is pretty important. Because I actually think that trans representation is important for everyone, more so than other forms of representation tend to be, because since trans people have a sort of how would you say this exactly? A highly variable and transient social experience. that a broad enough way of putting it? Because their life experiences touch on so many different elements of human socialization. I feel like their ability to present themselves in an industry almost feels like a blanket advocacy for the ability for people of any gender identity to be there, not just trans people, if that makes any sense, you know? I feel like I feel like maybe it's just because trans people are further up in the woke ladder than just like regular cisgender feminism. Uh but it feels like they have does that make any sense? Leftist wokest vagueness? Goddamn right. Absolutely.